A couple of weeks ago, Anthony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, gave a speech at the Johns Hopkins University. And I found that speech to be so incredibly unbelievable that I just thought I'd make this video actually giving my comments and my opinions and thoughts on that speech. Do excuse me, I have a bit of a cold, so my voice is a bit strange. But without further ado, let's crack on and listen to the speech.
So let's start with where we are. The international landscape that all of you are studying is profoundly different from the one that I encountered when I started out in government 30 years ago alongside Mr. Steinberg. The end of the Cold War brought with it the promise of an inexorable march toward greater peace and stability, international cooperation, economic interdependence, political liberalization, human rights. And indeed, the post-Cold War era ushered in remarkable progress. More than 8 billion people lifted from poverty. Historic lows in conflicts between states. Deadly diseases diminished, even eradicated. Now, not everyone benefited equally from the extraordinary gains of this period. And there were serious challenges to the order. The wars in the former Yugoslavia, the genocide in Rwanda, 9/11 in the Iraq War, the 2008 global financial crisis, Syria, the COVID pandemic, to name a few. But what we are experiencing now is more than a test of the post-Cold War order. It's the end of it.
So in this first part, he talks about greater peace and stability and greater cooperation, greater economic independence. Now, I think that's only where it suited the USA. He then talks about that more than 1 billion people lifted out of poverty. Now, a massive amount of those people are actually people lifted out of poverty here in China. And actually, I feel that the US has actually kept most of Africa and the developing world into poverty so that they don't become rivals to them. And he then talks about not everyone benefited equally. Obviously not, because I think that was the way the US designed it to be. The US have clubbed together with their small group of allies, and they're the ones that have benefited while the rest of the world have been at the behest of the USA. Then he said there were serious challenges to the order. Now, mainly wars and the financial crisis. Now, forgive me if I'm wrong here, but a majority of those wars and even the 2008 financial crisis were actually caused by the USA themselves. Since the end of the Second World War, they've waged wars all around the world. They've overthrown governments. They've destabilized countries. And, it's just unbelievable that they don't really see that it's their doing. And he then goes on to admit that the unipolar world where the USA make all the rules is coming to an end.
Decades of relative geopolitical stability have given way to an intensifying competition with authoritarian powers, revisionist powers. Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine is the most immediate, the most acute threat to the international order enshrined in the UN Charter and its core principles of sovereignty, territorial integrity and independence for nations, and universal indivisible human rights for individuals.
He then talks of decades of geopolitical stability. Now, I think what he means there is that while the USA can decide all the rules and invade countries that disagree with them or don't follow their mantra, then that's geopolitical stability. Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and again, this in my mind was totally engineered by the USA. They overthrew the government of Ukraine in 2014. They then put billions of dollars into Ukraine to build up its far right-wing army. And then as head of NATO, they push more and more eastwards after numerous promises not to. This just left the Russians with virtually no option at all.
Meanwhile, the People's Republic of China poses the most significant long-term challenge. because it not only aspires to reshape the international order, it increasingly has the economic, the diplomatic, the military, the technological power to do just that. And Beijing and Moscow are working together to make the world safe for autocracy through their no-limits partnership.
So, as far as he's concerned, China poses the biggest long-term challenge. As he says, they want to change the order, but everything I've seen is that China are pushing for a multipolar world where rules are decided by many countries based on the rules of the United Nations. He says China have the military, economic and technological capability as well as a diplomatic ability, then talks about the closer alliance between China and Russia, which instead of the US pushing them further apart, their actions have actually brought them closer together.
As this competition ramps up, many countries are hedging their bets.
He then says, as this competition ramps up, many countries are hedging their bets. Crazy how the USA see it as a competition, but what I think he really means here is that many countries don't want to align with the US as they see China as a better alternative.
Countries and citizens are losing faith in the international economic order.
He actually means countries and citizens are fed up with the US bullying them.
A handful of governments that use rule-shattering subsidies, stolen IP, and other market-distorting practices to gain an unfair advantage in key sectors.
And then he talks about all the things that the US have engaged in and continue to engage in. The blowing up of the Nord Stream pipeline and the Inflation Reduction Act are just two recent examples.
Technology and globalization that hollowed out and displaced entire industries, and policies that failed to do enough to help out the workers and communities that were left behind. And inequality that has skyrocketed. Between 1980 and 2020, the richest 0.1% accumulated the same wealth as the poorest 50%.
What it really means is that US businesses move their production to China in order to take advantage of lower cost workforce and make more profits for their shareholders. This will also help them keep inflation low for the last couple of decades.
So, we find ourselves at what President Biden calls an inflection point. One era is ending, a new one is beginning. And the decisions that we make now will shape the future for decades to come.
Yes, an inflection point where the US are no longer going to be able to dictate how the world operates, and that decisions will need to involve other countries.
The United States is leading in this pivotal period from a position of strength. Strength grounded in both our humility and our confidence. Humility because we face challenges that no one country can address alone. Because we know we will have to earn the trust of a number of countries and citizens for whom the old order failed to deliver on many of its promises. Because we recognize that leadership starts with listening and understanding shared problems from the perspective of others so that we can find common ground.
Humility, listening to others to find common ground. The US for decades could have listened to others, but they never did. And they still don't. Just look at how they have dictated to Africa, and even now they are not at all interested in considering Russian concerns over NATO.
And because we face profound challenges at home, which we must overcome if we're going to lead abroad.
For sure, growing poverty, record levels of drug abuse, huge prison populations, gun crime and a huge homeless problem. It's good that Blinken realises they need to fix their own issues before lecturing others. Must give him credit for that one.
A world where individuals are free in their daily lives and can shape their own futures, their communities, their countries. A world where every nation can choose its own path and its own partners. A world where goods, ideas, and individuals can flow freely and lawfully across land, sea, sky, and cyberspace, where technology is used to empower people, not to divide, surveil, and repress them. A world where the global economy is defined by fair competition, openness, transparency, and where prosperity is not measured only in how much countries' economies grow, but how many people share in that growth. A world that generates a race to the top in labor and environmental standards, in health, education, infrastructure, technology, security, and opportunity. A world where international law and the core principles of the UN Charter are upheld and where universal human rights are respected.
Huh. A world where nations can choose their own path and their own partners. Is he joking? The US have been behind 70 plus government coups and overthrows since the end of the Second World War. Many of those were governments that wanted to choose their own path, but unfortunately didn't align with what the US wanted. A world where goods and ideas, individuals can flow freely. Yeah, only if the US decides so. Not to surveil people. Man, the US are the biggest surveillance state in the world. That was uncovered by Snowden many years ago. A world that generates a race to the top, only as long as it's the USA that is at the top.